Hi, my name is Wayne, and this is Type Tested. What you see in front of me here today is an IBM Selectric 2 with a correcting feature from approximately 1980. Now, originally I shied away from these machines because I'm more interested in the manuals. And these, they're big, they're heavy, they're hard to store, and I don't like the cartridges, at least in terms of they're much harder, more expensive to be able to keep the typewriter in operation. But when I learned how the fundamental operating principles on this work, and that is associated with this, which is one of the wiffle trees, the engineer in me decided that I had to have one to study. And as a matter of fact, I have two. This one functions, though it needs some work, such as a new belt and reinforcement on the hub here. I have another one which doesn't function, which I will work on repairing after I get done studying this one. So, as noted, I don't claim to be anything at all of an expert on this particular typewriter, but I am learning, and I like learning. And this typewriter has some fascinating things associated with it. Now, one thing about this, if I turn this on, and I start moving things around, you can see that things here they can happen very, very fast. And that can make it very hard to actually study the device. So, what IBM did was to create what they called a hand cycle tool, which would allow you to be able to manually turn the shaft and control the cycle so that you can operate it slowly and, more importantly, be able to stop it at key points within that cycle so that you can do measurements and adjustments. Now, I have a modern production of this. This is obviously a third party. This is a T-handle with a threaded end. Now, it's important to note that these are left-hand threads because the shaft needs to turn, as they say, top to the front in this direction. Now, obviously, I can do this by cycling, moving my thumb or finger across the belt here, but if I actually go to do something like a return operation, well, that gets very hard to do, so that doesn't really work. So that's where the hand cycle tool comes in. Now, originally, these were produced with a knob on it, much like you would have found on the Platinum. And I'm not at my workbench, I'm on my kitchen counter, obviously, because I'm in the process of studying this typewriter and doing a little bit of tune-up. So we take this, and we see that there is a little hole here on the end of the shaft, which is meant to receive this hand cycle tool. So you thread it on, turn it until it locks, and then you can begin turning the lever with more power than you could just by moving the belt. So, if I tab over, everything works. It hits the stop, I hit return, and the carrier goes back where it belongs. And one important term, because this doesn't move, but this does, it's no longer a carriage, it is a carrier, because that's what carries the print head and the cartridge and all the escapement and all the associated mechanisms. So, one minor bit of terminology. Anyway, one observation I made, which I thought was kind of interesting, and it'll be a little hard to see here. Let me get some additional light. So you can see, if you look, let me zoom in here, that if I hit the tab and then begin moving the hand cycle tool, you can see that the center hub there is turning, and it is turning clockwise. 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 And it is turning And then, so there's a tab stop. Now if I hit return and I start moving it, you can see that it's now turning counterclockwise. What this is the spring barrel. This is actually a manual machine electrically actuated. Turn my light off. Come on. There we go. Now the interesting thing about this is because of that fact, when I press the tab key, it's very, very easy to move the carrier in this direction. When I press the return key, it is more difficult to move it in the other direction. And that is because of the spring. Here, the spring is helping me move the carrier. So if I move this all the way to the end, it's quite easy to do. Once I hit the return key, in addition to moving the carrier, I'm having to rewind that spring. So there's a lot more tension on the leftward movement than there is on the rightward movement. So I just thought that was an interesting thing to observe that I thought I would mention. Now, one other point. This shaft turns top to the front. It should never be turned backwards because there are things that can be damaged if you try to do so. But you have to get the hand cycle tool off the machine. So what I have found to do is there's this big kind of lug on this right here. So what I will do is I will bring that to the top, I will hold it, and then I will take the hand cycle tool, and it's going to be very, very difficult to show this with only two hands. But I will then take this and turn it clockwise while holding this protrusion here, so the shaft can't move against the motion. Then, of course, take it and unscrew it, and there you go. Now, technically, these are not supposed to be left attached to the machine while you have it powered on. And that is because there is additional mass here, which creates additional inertia that the motor has to deal with, both in operation and in stopping. So that can kind of increase stress on some parts of the machine, but for the purposes of testing, you're almost going to have it on while you're working. So as long as you're careful about it and you don't just run the machine for hours with this on, it's not going to be that big a deal. But I would recommend only running it powered on only as much as you need to in order to do the job. Anyway, like I said, just my first observations on this IBM Selectric 2. I've already had to do a few things to this, like clean it out, because these machines are always just gummy, grimy, and they're just coated in grease if they've never been serviced. And I had to adjust the return mechanism here because it wasn't quite working right. And that involves some adjustments down here, as well as a bit of cleaning and some adjustments, some cleaning of the platen, the pulleys here, the bearings, that is. So this here is set in place, and the platen turns within this bearing, and these can get really gummed up and just add enough stress that things don't work quite right. So, like I said, as I go through this, if I learn something that I find is kind of interesting, or I make some particular observation, it's my inclination to share knowledge that I learned. And I like learning, and I like sharing neat things. So that's what I will be doing with this typewriter in the coming weeks and months. Now, these are complicated devices. And I'm not an expert. I don't think I will ever be an expert. So I'm not going to attempt to show you expert level stuff. Just point out things that I personally find interesting. Once again, my name is Wayne, and this is Type Tested.